Today, we're going to continue with our introduction to Meseches Shviis, the laws of Shemitah. We scanned this and we sent it out last week. It comes from the Mishnah Behira, and there's an introduction about the halachas of Shviis. We're on the first page, I believe. It has page number 3 at the top. It looks like this. Page number 3, I believe the scan was 3 pages, but the first page is 3, the second page is 4, the last page is 5. So we're towards the bottom of the page, Kedushas HaPeiros. The Peiros of Shviis have sanctity. Kosva Tosfos writes, and he's quoting now Tosfos, Ein mispar ledinim ulisurim sheyesh b'peiros Shviis. It's almost, you can't even count. Tosfos is just emphasizing that the laws about the fruits of Shviis are numerous. It's almost like you can't even count how many there are. So Tosfos says there's almost no counting to how many laws and how many prohibitions there are dealing with the fruits of the Shviis. Lahalan hadinim v'isurim ha'ikorim. And the following are the basic laws and the basic isurim. In other words, this is a real summary. Tosfos said that there was a vast amount of halachas and a vast amount of prohibitions. We're just summarizing them now. Aleph, hafkaris hapeiros. The peiros have to be hefker. We already mentioned the issue of a person that has a garden, and he's in the garden. He has fruits, vegetables growing in his garden, and his garden is completely enclosed with a fence, and no one can get into his garden. That presents an issue during Shemitah. If things are growing in your garden, they are supposed to be hefker, and people are supposed to be able to get in there and pick them. And there are different ways to solve that issue, which we'll see as we learn the Meseches. But the peiros that are growing in your field are hefker. Mitzvah mehatorah lahashir hapeiros b'sod. It's a biblical mitzvah that the fruits, the vegetables growing in your field are to be left alone so that everyone can take from it, including the owner. The owner of the field, as we learned last time, he's allowed to come into his own field. He's like everyone else and pick. He's allowed to pick fruits, vegetables, that amount which he needs for his own household. The problem is you can't start picking from your field and stocking up in your house. And it says now in parentheses, Muvad sarche Michael b'nei beisai, except for what you need for food for your own household. That you're allowed to take. Ulafkivam lako, and everything that's going in your field becomes hefker for everyone. Shenema v'ashvius tishmetena unetashta. Shvius, you leave your field alone. That's a pasuk in the Torah. Kol hanoyel sadeu b'shvius. Anyone that locks up his field during Shvius, bitel mitzvahs asezu. He has been mavato this biblical commandment that your field should be hefker and your peiros should be hefker. How do you deal with a garden that's completely locked up? A person sometimes has a garden, he has things growing in it, and it's a first floor garden, but it's lifted above street level. And there's no way that people can walk into that garden. They would have to walk into the building, walk through your apartment, and then get into the garden. You don't want people walking through your apartment. So how do you handle that kind of garden? We'll see as we learn the Meseches. But this idea that a person has a garden with things growing, fruits, vegetables, and it's completely sealed off from the public, nobody can get in there, creates a serious problem during Shemitah. So that's the first halacha of Shemitah, the fruits. Hafkaras hapeiros. The peiros are hefker. Beis, second rule. Iser hefsid. There's a biblical prohibition to in any way destroy peiros Shviis, including devaluing them, which we'll talk about in a moment. Yesh l'shtamish b'peirish Shviis l'tzorech adam. The fruits of Shviis should be used for the needs of a man, human beings. Lefi udam, according to the normal use of the peiros. Machal adam. There are things that grow that the natural use for them is human beings eat it. If human beings eat it, you're not supposed to give it to your animals to eat. You're reducing the kedusha of the peiros Shviis. Machal behema. There are certain things that grow that are meant for animals to eat. You give it to animals to eat. Sicha. There are certain things that grow, and the purpose of them growing is to crush them and to make rubbing oils from them. That's what you can do with those. Severe. There are other things that grow that you crush them and you make different paints with them to color. That's what you can do with them. But if you take something that's human food, designated for human food, and you decide that you're going to make it into a paint, you violated Kedushas Peiros Shviis. Uchadayim. Ein l'shanas mehametara lo yu'adu. You're not allowed to change the normal purpose for which something grows. It has Kedusha Shviis. It's made for human beings. It has Kedusha of human food. You cannot use it for something else. Ve'ein lahafsidam. You can't damage or destroy them. Shenema, the pasuk says, "La'achla," you shall consume it, eat it. V'loy lahafsid, you shall not destroy and devalue it. One of the interesting questions that comes up is, as an example for this, you have grapes that you pick during Shviis. Halachically permissible. Last Shemitah, I went out with someone to the Binyamin area, and there was a person who was Shema Torah Mitzvahs who had a huge vineyard, and he did it. He broke open his fence, and everybody was able to come and pick grapes. I went with a friend, and we picked the grapes, and my friend made wine out of these grapes. So we had Shemitah wine, which of course you have to be very careful with. You can't spill it out. You can't throw it out. You have to drink all of it. We'll get to how you do that when we learn the Meseches. But can you take grapes that are usually meant either to eat the grape or to crush the grape and make wine? Can you take the wine and cook the wine and make it into grape juice? Is that the valuing the purpose of a grape when you cook the grape into a juice? Okay. There's a shaila about taking grapes of Shviis and cooking them into grape juice. But I'm just using that shaila as an example. Something that grows in the field that has a very specific purpose, using it for another purpose or a lower purpose. Obviously, we know that wine is more chashuv than grape juice. So using it for a different purpose or a lower purpose is a degradation of Kedusha Shviis and is biblically prohibited. Gimel, the third general rule about Peiros Shviis. Issa Schoira uKedushas Hadamim. You're not allowed to do business or sell Peiros Shviis. If a person does sell Peiros Shviis, the money gets Kedusha Shviis. The Kedusha of Shviis is tofes the money. So if you think you're a smart person and you sell your Shviis fruits, and now you have cash, your cash now has Kedusha Shviis, and what do you have to do with your cash? We'll see when we learn the Meseches. But Kedusha Shviis is what we call tofes damav. It grabs hold of the money. Gimel, Issa Schayur Kedushas Hadam. Asur lischar b'peiros Shviis l'mataras rebach. It is biblically prohibited to do business with the fruits of Shviis in order to make a profit. Shenemar, the pasuk says, "L'achla," you are to eat the peiros of v'lay l'schayra. You are not to deal with them. Aval, however, muta limkor ma'at peiros Shviis l'tzayach machal b'nei beisoy. A person who owns a field that's growing fruits and vegetables, he's allowed to take a little of the fruits and vegetables. Remember, we said that the owner of the field, he's no worse off than anyone else. The owner of the field can go into the field and pick fruits and vegetables in a small enough amount that's needed for his own house. The same way he's permitted to pick a small amount that's needed for his own family, he's allowed to pick that amount that he needs for his family and sell that small amount, and with that go into the marketplace and buy something else. So in that case, the money that he gets for selling that minimal amount of Peiros Shviis does not grab on. It is not toifus damim, because he was permitted to take that amount, that minimal amount of fruit and vegetables into his house for his own personal use. He's therefore, if he has he takes the pomegranates that he's allowed to take into his house, and his family doesn't like pomegranates, he can take the amount of pomegranates that he's permitted to pick and take them and sell them and then go to the shuk with the money. I'm flipping now to page 4. So he's allowed to sell a little of the Peiros Shviis in order to feed his family. To keep the Kedushas Peiros Shviis in place, what we do is we don't want you using a scale. In other words, if non-Shviis pomegranates are 10 shekel a kilo, we don't want this owner of the field who picked some pomegranates, which he's allowed to do for his family, and his family doesn't want to eat the pomegranate, so he's going to sell it to someone. We don't want him taking the pomegranates, putting it on a scale, and selling it for 10 shekel a kilo. We don't want him to scale it. We don't want him to sell it at market price. We don't want him handling, even though he's allowed to use it for his family, we don't want him handling what is Peiros Shviis as if it's completely not kadosh. And therefore, we're going to put it on a scale and start charging market prices. You sell that which you're allowed to take for your family, just an estimate, but you don't actually scale it as if you're professionally selling it. Not b'mida meduyekes. When we started the introduction, I said there are going to be a lot of questions. Just everybody be patient with the questions. We're dealing here with a summary of an entire Masechta and a very involved Masechta about fruits, vegetables, what you can do, what you can sell, what's kadosh, what's not kadosh. We're just getting basic background information that will help us later. So everybody, please be patient with questions. Mois hamiskablos avur Peiros Shviis miskachos v'yesh liknas behem dvar Michael v'linig by the Kedusha Shviis. Now, the person who owns the field, he went into his field, he collected some pomegranates, some dates, some grapes, and he brought it into his house in the minimal amount that he's allowed to feed his family. Those peiros that he picked still have Kedusha Shviis. And because they have Kedusha Shviis, he and his family have to treat it as if it's Kedusha Shviis. What happens if his family says, we're not interested in the grapes, we're not interested in the pomegranates, we're not interested in the grapes, dates, pomegranates, can you go sell it? So the father goes and sells it without scaling it. He just uses an estimate, he sells it. And now he has the money. That money becomes Kedusha Shviis. That money, the same way that the fruit, that minimal amount of fruit that he was going to bring into his house has Kedusha Shviis. So for example, if he brought grapes into his house, he couldn't flip a grape to his dog or his cat. It still has Kedusha Shviis. If his family doesn't want to eat it and he's going to sell that minimal amount, he sells it. Now, the money that he got for that minimal amount is niskadish, it has Kedusha Shviis. And then he goes into the marketplace and he buys food. He doesn't buy shoes. He goes and he buys food. He has money and he now goes buys chicken. He sold the pomegranates, the grapes, and the dates, whatever, in that minimal amount. He got 50 shekel. He takes the 50 shekel. The 50 shekel now have Kedusha Shviis. He goes and he buys a chicken. That chicken has Kedusha Shviis and it has to be used appropriately. So if you want to take a piece of that chicken and flip it to your dog, you can't flip it to your dog because the chicken now has Kedusha Shviis. V'yesh liknos bahem dvar Michael v'linig bo b'Kedusha Shviis. Next halacha. Iser hotzah l'chutz la'aretz. You're not allowed to take Peirish Shvius outside Eretz Yisrael. Also, lahotzi Peirish Shvius l'chutz la'aretz. It is prohibited to take fruits that have Kedusha Shvius to chutz la'aretz. This becomes an issue with esrogim in year 8, the first year of the new cycle. You cannot send esrogim that grew, and of course esrogim are a big problem in Eretz Yisrael. You're not allowed to buy an esrig. How do you buy an esrig? For example, in year 8, the esrogim you buy in year 8 grew in year 7. They have Kedusha Shvius. How do you buy an esrig? So that is a separate problem, again, which the Meseches will deal with. But you can take those esrogim that were grown during Shemitah, they have Kedusha Shvius. You cannot ship them to Chutz La'aretz. You're not allowed to ship them to Chutz La'aretz. Also, lahotzi Peirish Shvius l'chutz la'aretz. Shenemar, the pasuk says, "Ba'artzecha tiyeh kol teros alocha." In Eretz Yisrael, it shall be eaten. Again, the discussion about esrogim, we're going to come back to. I'm just giving you an example of what can happen with Peirish Shvius. We don't take Peirish Shvius to chutz la'aretz. So if a person's visiting Eretz Yisrael during Shemitah, and he buys Peirish Shvius, he buys some grapes, or again, you have to know when it grew with all the rules. Is it 6th-year grapes? Is it 7th-year grapes? In the 8th year, it can still be 7-year grape. But let's assume a person visits Eretz Yisrael and he buys some grapes and he didn't finish his grapes and he wants to take them on his flight back to America. If those grapes have Kedusha Shvius, he has a very severe problem with taking them to Chutz La'aretz. Peiros that have Kedusha Shvius are supposed to remain only in Eretz Yisrael. Kamokein also limsa Peiros Shvius l'nachri. By the same token, it is forbidden to give Peiros Shvius to a goy. V'chein also l'moisram l'am ha'aretz ha'choshet shel ochlam b'Kedusha Shvius. And by the same token, you can't give Peiros that have Kedusha Shvius to an am ha'aretz who doesn't know the laws of Kedusha Shvius. And we have to suspect that he may not take care of it properly. We don't give these Kedusha Shvius Peiros to someone who will not know how to observe the Kedusha properly. So these are very strict halachas to make sure that the Peiros remain the Kedusha Shvius. There's so much attention given to the field and the gardens. How much can I water, and can I prune, and can I do this, and can I do that? A lot of attention has to be given to the Peiros themselves. There's a kedusha to these Peiros. They can't go to chutz la'aretz. They can't be given to a goy. They can't be given to an am ha'aretz. And if you sell them, even when you're permitted to sell them because they grew in your field and you want to use it for your household, you still have to use the money for kedusha shvius. So there's a lot of kedusha halacha involved in the Peiros shvius. Hey. Mitzvahs bir. Now this is a really complicated area in the Meseches. When we say the word bir, what we start thinking about is bir chametz. On the 14th night of Nisan, we search for chametz, and the morning of the 14th, we burn the chametz. Biur. Biur comes, according to most, from the word hav'ara, lahav'ir, to burn, create a fire. Bir chametz is to burn your chametz. There's something called in Hilchos Shvius that there's a time of biur. There's a time where the fruits of Shvius need biur. What does biur mean? Peiros shehistayma onasam ve'ena mitzuyim od besados. Yesh lo tzia me'abayis ulevar. Grapes. The grapes are in the fields, in the vineyards, and they're growing. There comes a point during the year, and how we know when this is, we're not going to discuss. That's a whole cheshbon in the Meseches, and there is literally a biur calendar. Let's make believe that the grapes of Shviis grow through, they're available in the field to be picked and through Iyar. Tavshin Pei Aleph Habolein L'Toiva is Shemitah. Iyar of Tavshin Pei Aleph, there's virtually no grapes left in the vineyards anymore. They've already ripened. That's really not a good example because grapes grow differently and they grow at different times. So again, dates are going to have a different time when they ripen. And from the time they ripen, people start picking them. And then there comes a point where everybody's picked it and the fields are empty from dates. That's the clock we're talking about. So there's a period of time where the grapes have ripened. Jews are walking all through Eretz Yisrael and picking grapes in the vineyards. And then it comes a point in time where literally there's no grapes left in the vineyards. That's the Shas Beer. At that time, there's a mitzvah of beer. If you in your home have any grapes stored up from all the picking of grapes that you did, you have to take it out of your house and be mavaya them. In other words, since there's no grapes left in the vineyards, there's no dates left on the trees, and there's a calendar date for these things. There's nothing left out in the public to be picked. Everything's been picked. And it turns out that there are Jews that have a whole stack of grapes at home, or a whole stack of dates at home, whatever it is. And now there's nothing left in the fields for anyone else to pick. And these Jews have some gathered in their house. On Beer Day, they have to take it out of their house. Now, what do you do on Beer Day? The Ramban, according to the Ramban, hefker. It means you take the stored up dates that you have in your house, you put it outside your house, and it becomes hefker. And now other people can pick from what you had stored up as dates. The Rambam Shita is ibud meha'olam. Biur means biur, to burn. Those stored up dates, grapes, etc., once the clock runs out and there's no grapes left in the vineyards, no dates left on the trees, you take them out of your house and you burn them, you destroy them. You cannot eat them anymore, no one can eat them anymore. So according to the Ramban Nachmanides, you take them out of your house and you let anyone take. According to the Rambam, you take them out of your house and you burn them, you destroy them. Shenemar, we learn this out from the pasuk, V'livhemtecha v'lachai asher ba'atzecha. It says that the fields are hefka for people, and the animals in the land. And as we learned before, food that's meant for human beings cannot give into animals. Food that's meant for animals, you can't crush and make into paint. Everything has to be used for its normal use. So the pasuk says, and the fruits in the field, etc., and the grains in the field shall be for man and for the animals. So the Chachamim learned from this pasuk, Dorshu Chazal, Kola lachayim and asadim, kalei lepeimin abayis. A behema is a domesticated animal. It's like an animal you would bring into your house. A chaya is a wild animal. So wild animals are running around everywhere, in the forests, in the fields, when they're open, and they're eating. Your domesticated animals, you feed. So the pasuk says that this is supposed to be for your behemoths and your chayas. So from here, Chazal learned out that if there comes a point in time where there's nothing left in the fields for a chaya who's running around, there's nothing left in the field for him, because all the dates have been picked, all the grains been picked, there's nothing left for the chayas who run around. Now you have to empty your house from that which you have in your house, and you could have fed possibly to your animal. At any rate, this is one of the most complex subjects in Shviis, the Zman Biur. When is it? Dates have a Zman Biur, grapes have a Zman Biur. When is the date? There's a calendar for these things. And once the beer comes, do you make it hefker like Nachmanides? Do you destroy it like Maimonides? Okay, that's the mitzvah of biur. Vav, isur svichen. This is probably even more complex than biur, or equally complex. Svichen. What are svichen? Chacham gozu lesa svichen. It's a rabbinic prohibition svichen. But what is it? Tvua, kidneys, v'yirokos, shegodlu, b'shviis me'aleim. Grain, beans, vegetables grew by themselves. A person can have a bean field, can have a grain field, vegetables, and he doesn't touch the field during Shemitah. And suddenly, some wheat starts popping up. The reason the wheat starts popping up is because the last time he cut his field and gathered the wheat, which was before Shemitah, kernels fell all over the place. The wind blew them all over the place. And then it came a rain, and the rain covered up these seeds with mud. And popping out of the ground in different places are stalks of wheat. Or popping up out of the ground in different places are beans. Or popping up in different places are vegetables. The person who owns the field didn't do anything wrong. He didn't plant anything. These are naturally these are seeds that fell as he was gathering the permitted fruits, vegetables, and grain. Seeds dropped, kernels dropped, and what do you know? A couple of months later, they're growing. This is called svicha. Chachamim forbade eating these svicha. Chachamim gazu leso svicha b'achila. Mechshash lizriya b'seise, v'yaymu shme'aleim godlu. Chachamim made a gzeira. They said, look, we know that there's a lot of this that goes on. Kernels fall and then they grow by themselves. And that's not a problem. However, if everyone's going to allow to eat these svichen, then what we're going to have is an intolerable situation where people will secretly, quietly, in the dark of night, they will see their fields. And then when things start growing in their fields, they'll say, I didn't do anything. It's svichen. They grew naturally. There were kernels that fell a couple of months ago. And there's really no way to prove yes or no. And these things really have kedusha shviis. So Chachamim made a gzeira. It's a rabbinic prohibition, svichen. Things that pop up in the field during Shemitah, even if the owner says, I didn't do anything, they're just kernels that are popping up. And sometimes you can see, you look at a field, the whole place is fallow, and there are a couple of places where there are some stalks growing. So logically, you say it's svichen. Nobody planted this, it's kernels. There's one there, one there, one there. Chachamim said, you can't eat that. It is kedusha shviis, because people may come to actually plant their fields that way and say that it's svichen. Omnam, however, Yerokos bor she'ein derech l'zorm, wild vegetables that grow, literally, that's the way they grow. People don't have to plant them. They just grow wildly. Ein b'hem issa svichen. There is no issa svichen, so if these kind of wild vegetables, maybe like wild mushrooms, pop up all over the place, and that's the way they grow, they just grow wildly without anybody planting them necessarily. There's no issa svichen on these kind of wild vegetables. Finally, we come to, in the summary of the last halacha of Shemitah, which has nothing to do with fields and fruits. This is called Shemitah's Ksafim, the Shemitah of money. Nema b'Torah, it says in the Torah in Pashas Re'eh, Miket Sheva Shonim Tasa Shemitah, at the end of 7 years there shall be a Shemitah. V'zedra Shemitah, Shomod Kobal Masha Yodei Ashiyasha B'Re'eu. Lo Yigos Es Re'eu Ves Achiv, Yikar Shemitah L'Hashem. You cannot collect debts that are owed to you by other people, specifically loans. Once the year of Shemitah ends, you can't collect anymore. Es hanochri tigos, v'asher yelachos achiva tashbeit yedecha. B'tzei hashana, b'tzei shnas hashmit and shkias hachama, and at shkias hachama, We're now in Tafshin Pei, Be'ezrat Hashem, Tafshin Pei Aleph Haboleinu L'Toiva. Next year, starting Rosh Hashanah, will be Shemitah. And for a year, it's Shemitah. Shkia of the end of Shemitah, which means it's almost going to be Tafshin Pei Beis. All loans become bottled. They're invalidated. You can't collect them. Invalidated may not be the right word. You can't collect them. Shviis mishametes is kol hachovos v'halvos shenasu ad pos. Shviis is mishamet. It cancels the debts and the loans. Perek Yud Masechta Mevarim Sugi Achov Shviis mishametes. In the 10th perek of this Masechta, the Mishnah will discuss what kind of debts are canceled through Shemitah. The Chaim of Varim Dine Takonis Prusbul Hamonea Shemitas Ksafim. Umiyuad Laoded Matan Halvaot Ishleya B'loch Shash L'ihachzerosam. And the Masechta will also discuss at the end the rules of a prusbul. Sure, almost everyone's heard of a prusbul. Everybody ever Shemitah or a day before the end of Shemitah or Erev the end of Shemitah. Everybody's walking around with these pre-printed forms, prusbul, and you get people to sign them. Most of them, and you get people to sign the bottom, and that becomes a prusbul, which means that to the extent that I have outstanding loans, outstanding debts that people owe me, I can collect it even after Shemitah through the operation of a prusbul. What is a prusbul? Who made the prusbul? All discussion at the end of the Masechta. Okay, now we go to Tamei HaMitzvah. What are the reasons for the mitzvah of Shviis? Sefer HaChinuch, the famous Sefer HaChinuch. We don't know who the author is of Sefer HaChinuch. We know that it's a Rishon. And it's one of the most famous Sfarim that count the 613 mitzvahs. And he goes parsha by parsha. We go through Parshas Bereshis. If there's a mitzvah, he'll explain it and discuss it and tell you the reason for the mitzvah. There are not so many mitzvahs in Chumash Bereshis. You get to Shemos and you get into Korban Pesach and Parshas Bo, Shalach, Yisro, Aseres Hadibros. Every par goes parsha by parsha. What mitzvahs are in that parsha? The Chinuch writes in the beginning to the Sefer that he wrote the Sefer because he has a son that's getting bar mitzvah, and he wants to learn with his son every Shabbos the mitzvahs that are in that parsha. So for that purpose, he wrote the Sefer HaChinuch to teach his son every Shabbos the mitzvahs that are in that week's parsha. And that became known as the Sefer HaChinuch. That's why it's called the Chinuch, because he used it as a book for Chinuch for his son. We're not sure who the author is, but he's a Rishon. So the Chinuch writes in Mitzvah Pei Dalet, Bir Tamei Mitzvah Shviis V'zel Lashona. This is now a quote from the Chinuch. Likboa b'libeinu, to establish in our hearts, uletzayer tzir chazak b'machshavteinu, and to create a vivid image in our minds, inyan, the idea, ki sheishes yomim asa Hashem es hashamayim v'sa'aretz, u'ayom hashvi shelo bore dova, hichtiv menucha. It's a Shabbos. And in the Parsha of Shemitah, it says, B'shavsa oretz Shabbos Lashem. It uses the word Shabbos. The same way that we work 6 days a week, and on the 7th day of the week, we rest, so that we understand that the Rebbe Shalom created heaven and earth. And on the 7th day, God ceased from his quote-unquote creative activity. The same thing we do in years. For 6 years, we work. The 7th year, we stop. And this is a whole, instead of 1 day of inculcating in ourselves the emunah that God created the world, and God supervises the world, and God controls and is sovereign over the world. Every 6 years, we inculcate this idea for an entire year. It's an entire year of learning about the fact that God created the heavens and earth and is the sovereign over the heavens and earth. One reason. Tam nosaf b'dvorav. The Chinuch gives another reason for the mitzvah Shemitah, lahargilenu b'midas ha'emunah b'abitachon, that we should become accustomed to living a life of trusting in God. Sharei hamafkir sadoisav meshamet chayvaisav hareu kamachrish Hashem hu od nakol, because someone that goes through the year of Shemitah and observes the laws of Shemitah. His fields become hefker for everyone. The debts that are owed to him get canceled. Now, who's going to take care of him? He can't go out to his field and collect from his field and store. He can collect from his field just what he needs for his family for that day. But he can't do what he's used to doing for 6 years. Collect from the field, store it up, sell it, make money. And now his debts and the debts and loans owed to him are going to be canceled also. So where's he going to get his parnasa from? Who's going to take care of me? And our mezainis and our parnasa are completely dependent on the will of Hashem. This is a new lesson in the year of Shemitah. Oh, the bir hachinuch sham. So we have a mitzvah of Shemitah to teach us that God created the heavens and earth, and He runs the heavens and earth. He's the sovereign of heavens and earth. And the same way on the seventh day, we rest to commemorate that. We rest the whole seventh year to commemorate that. Another aspect of Shviis is to inculcate in us emun and bitachon, that the Rebbeinu Shalom provides the 6 years that the fruits and the vegetables were growing and you sold them and you had a parnasa and everything was going great when you were working. You should know that that was your hishtadlus, but the success of your hishtadlus always comes back to the will of God, the Ratzon Hashem. And this we learn in Shviis, when the Rebbeinu Shalom says, take a step back, everyone can eat from your field, your loans will be canceled, and I take care of you. And now that you understand I take care of you, I take care of you in the other 6 years as well. And then he brings down a Makar Chayim that gives a different reason for the mitzvah of Shemitah, which is sort of to make sure that the community is taking care of everyone. There comes a point in time where we teach everyone a lesson, that you open your field and the poor, the rich can all come in and everyone can eat from the fruits of the field, so that what you grow, you understand, is not just selfishly yours, but there's communal responsibilities as well to other people. And this too is something that's taught to us during Shviis. So it teaches us that the Rebbeinu Shalom created the world in 6 days, rested the seventh. And we do this every 6 years. It teaches us about emun and bitachon, about who really sustains us. And even during the 6 years when we work, the success we have is based upon God's will. And it also teaches us that we have a communal responsibility to other people, not just to ourselves. There's a community, there's a Klal Yisrael, there's a world to whom we also have responsibilities. Okay, so that's the Hakdama to Meseches Shviis. A lot of different concepts about what you can do in your field and what you can't do in your field. Concepts about what you can do with the fruits and what you can't do with the fruits. And concepts about what happens at the end of Shemitah with loans and debts that are owed to you.